Welcome to Leading Questions. I'm Megan Mah.
I'm Julia Sydorenko.
And I'm Kayla Theeuwen, and we're lawyers at WeirFoulds. For those of you who aren't familiar with Leading Questions, it's a web series where we usually ask burning questions about law, business, and professional development.
Today, we have another special edition for all you students preparing for the upcoming recruitment. We'll answer all of your burning questions about how to prepare for the upcoming interviews in our new virtual world.
We're joined by 3 of our 2020-2021 articling students.
Hi there, my name is Nofil Nadeem.
Hi, I'm Benattar.
And I'm Kiran Waterhouse.
And they're here to share their experiences with us. So let's get to it.
Okay, first questions are for Nofil. So this might be the first time that law firms are doing mass recruiting by Zoom. So the whole experience is going to be new to everyone involved in the process. But in your experience with Zoom so far as an articling student, what kind of suggestions do you have for setting up your home environment for a Zoom interview?
Right, thanks Kayla, that's a great question. I know a lot of students out there are nervous about the first Zoom OCI cycle. So I think first things first, it's really important to make sure that your hardware is good to go. So it's important to have the latest version of Zoom. I think we're at 5.4.2 at the time of this recording. So make sure that's good to go so you don't have any technical glitches or difficulties, which would cause your call to drop. On that note, you also may want to have a conversation with the people that you're living with to make sure they're not juicing the router and the bandwidth. So making sure your roommate's not downloading 12 movies while you're in the midst of your interviews, because that might cause some backlogs, I think. And there's nothing worse than a garbled connection when you're on a Zoom call. On that note, it's important that your background is also clean and tidy. For the Zoom call today, and the special edition specifically, I made my bed, as you can see in the background. So it's very important to avoid unnecessary clutter like laundry, dishes, detergent, etc. In the background, which may be distracting for your interviewer. And on that note, if you don't have a suitable background, you may wish to use a green screen. So getting something like a neutral color, whether it's just a simple white background or a darker color if you're wearing white, which would not be great having white on white after Labor Day as well. So just making sure your background is super neutral, you've got a desk or a library. And yeah, on that note, it's also important to minimize your noise. So turning off your notifications, this little guy over here, keeping background apps that are running in the background to a minimum, and just ensuring that there's no pings from your Outlook or your Gmail while you're on your interview.
Good tips. 2 things. 1, bed looks great. 2, I'm not afraid of wearing white after Labor Day. Just saying.
Brave.
But anyway, going back to background noises, people and pets, are they cute cameo appearances or?
Kayla, you know what? As much as it breaks my heart, I don't think your puppy is best suited in an OCI interview. It might be the sidekick you need, but probably not. These things can usually take you out of an interview, and keeping in mind that your OCI is about 15 minutes in length, anytime that you have someone coming into frame, whether it's a roommate or a furry cuddly pet, that's going to be time that you don't have to spend with the interviewer. And it's just going to take you out of the interview. So you want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward and you're getting all that entire 15 minutes with the interviewer.
Yeah, so, totally. I agree. I actually don't really like seeing people's pets on Zoom meetings and stuff like that. Like time and a place, you know? And I think interview is definitely not the time or place. Okay, so I've got one last question for you. I remember when I was going through the process a few years ago, one thing that I was always told was that overcrowding your schedule was not a good idea. So on the more logistical side, what do you think? Like how many Zoom interviews can one student fit in a day?
Right. On that note, I think it's very important to make sure that you treat it sort of as a marathon and not a race. I don't know if there's a perfect magic number in terms of how many interviews you should schedule, but generally I think it's very important that you have a good break at least between every interview to make sure you have a chance to grab a sip of water or take a bio break or have a snack, just making sure that you're steadying yourself throughout, because if you're going back to back from interview, you're going to interview much differently in the afternoon than you would in the morning, and it's going to show. You just want to make sure you're not burning out and exhausting yourself throughout the process. So my advice is just make sure you give yourself a solid break and practice, practice, practice. Make sure you're practicing, whether it's with your friends, in a suit as well, if you want, and just going through the process. And that's a great note.
A good segue, Nofil.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Nofil. The next question is for Abby. How should we dress for a Zoom interview?
Yes, good question. Very important question because we've been wearing sweats a lot more during this pandemic, but I'd say an interview is really where you want to make a good first impression. You have to put your best foot forward. So for an OCI interview, it would be very similar to the in-person experience. You want to wear business professional attire, at least that's what I recommend, for sure on top. If you want to feel professional, if it makes you feel professional, on the bottom as well, even though I don't suspect that you'll be, getting out of your chair in the interview. But for men, that is a suit and tie. And for the ladies, that would be something like a dress and jacket or a pantsuit with a professional blouse underneath, something of that sort.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great tip. I know there's a temptation to only want to wear a suit on top, but wearing the full suit might make you feel more professional, and a mindset can go a long way. So what about headphones? Good, bad?
Yeah, headphones are fine if you need them. And sometimes the sound is better with them. So I would say whatever aids an easy flow of communication and good audio in your interview is what you should be doing. So my tip is to use whatever pair is least distracting, preferably no over the ear headphones. If you have wire headphones, if that's distracting, maybe try to borrow a different pair from a friend or a family member if you can. Pretty much anything to help facilitate the interview so that it's like a one-on-one in-person experience, even though I know that's tough during the pandemic.
Yeah, agreed. One other thing that I know that makes a really big difference is lighting. You want to be seen when you're in the interview. So consider sitting in front of a window or setting up a lamp in front of you, and then test out your setup before the interview. Also keep in mind that it's getting darker sooner now. So if you've got interviews into the late evening, turn on the lights before you start those interviews so it doesn't get too dark in your room halfway through that interview.
Yeah, lighting is key. And another suggestion is to not shield yourself in video calls. So pretty much practice all the time, whenever you can. See what you look like in front of the camera. Try it out, see if you feel professional and that you look professional, like you could be walking into a firm or into an OCI.
Thanks, Abby. So our last question is for Kiran. How can you engage with your interviewer over Zoom?
Well, the first thing that you want to make sure that you do is to have your camera adjusted properly. So you want it to be in a stable position, not wobbling all over the place, and you want it focused at eye level. You should use a laptop stand to adjust the height if necessary, and if you don't have one, you can always just borrow a couple of those thick law school tomes to prop it up. You also want to be about as far away from the camera as your interviewer is. Sometimes you really see a mismatch about how perspective works over Zoom, and you want to recreate the in-person experience as much as possible.
Yes, I've been on a number of Zoom calls where I can only see the top of someone's head.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure your entire face at the very least is visible. You also want to try and make eye contact with the camera and your interviewer, not the screen. You should also have your materials prepared in front of you beforehand. You don't want to be scrambling to remember what's on your resume at the last minute, right in the middle of an interview. And you don't want to have to avoid, look away, shuffle around. You want to be as professional as possible. If you can resize your Zoom browser to be in the center of your screen as well, so it looks like you're making direct eye contact with the interviewer. And you also want to listen attentively to questions and ask for clarification if possible, all while making eye contact. These things might seem a little bit silly when you're alone in your home, but they really do make a big difference in the impact that they have in the interview.
That's a good point. It's really easy to get distracted by other things that may be going on your screen. So one thing you should consider doing is closing all other internet browsers, your email, especially those that cause notifications like we were talking about earlier. So any last tips, Kiran?
I would say two things. The first thing is, it sounds cheesy, everyone says it, but it's really important to be yourself. The other one is a little bit of a smaller thing. It's really nice to send a thank you note after your interview. It doesn't have to be long, but maybe you can touch on some personal stuff that was discussed in the interview and to leave that lasting impression with your interviewer.
Awesome. I think this has been super helpful. Thank you guys so much for your input. I think you will give a lot of prospective candidates some food for thought as they're preparing for this interview process. So thanks again. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for joining us. If you've got any questions about law, business development, professional development, or questions for our students, please feel free to reach out to us at leadingquestions@weirfolds.com, and we will see you next time.